Wisteria floribunda, you'll see that there's 2 wisterias listed on your list. Another one on the back, number 1244, Wisteria sinensis. And it's this vine here that we're looking at, and these are the stems of it, right? So it's a large stemmed plant. It hails from Asia, and this is one of the most attractive vines floristically. So everybody is familiar with this plant when it's in flower because it produces long panicles of blooms that hang down. They're pendulous. If you go onto the website on Canada Plants and you look at any of the wisterias, there's Wisteria venusta, floribunda, sinensis, maybe macrophylla. There's a couple of pictures of the ones at Cuddy's. There's a picture of a standard over here, and I'll tell you what a standard is in a second. But they have very, very attractive panicles of blooms, either white or lilac-y, violet color. And they're absolutely incredible when they're in bloom. If you remember back to the pergola at Cuddy's on the patio over the fish pond, so it's a large covered area. When that flowers in the spring, late spring, it's like a mass of icicles hanging down. It's just, they come, the plant is tied, so this vine is tied to the structure to keep it down, so that the panicles drop through the woodwork and hang below. So it's almost a ceiling of these inverted pyramids hanging down, and they can be quite long, so they can be really attractive. The post-bloom aspect are pods about this long that look like broad bean pods, so they're really quite broad, and they're very velvety. So you get these pods. Now this one, you can see the remnant of one pod that's kind of split open, and you can see the way they open, they twist, and that releases the seed. So on this one beam right above, yeah, thank you, right there, yeah, you can see past that pod. So they're really quite velvety before they open, and they're really kind of unique. And they have a very large bean-like seed in them. What most people do is they plant this vine on some little Canadian Tire white vinyl arbor in the garden. And what happens is Grandma goes ambling down the garden, and you have the veg garden beyond the arbor because you use the arbor to separate the 2 garden rooms. And Grandma gets killed because the wisteria vine has crushed the arbor and Grandma squashed. So you can see, this is small. If you go on the website, I deliberately took a picture of a vine in England, a wisteria vine, with a trunk like that. So you can see why you need a very, very firm structure to support the plant. The big problem with wisteria is people can't get it to flower, right? That's, if you're going to work in a garden center this spring, guarantee you someone is going to come in and question you on wisteria. I planted my wisteria 5 years ago and it hasn't flowered yet. What am I doing wrong? Well, they're doing several things wrong. One, they're impatient. 2, if they tell you that they're feeding it regularly, that's wrong, because plants, if they are kept in a vegetative state, they're smart. They are going to keep growing. Blooms are part of the reproductive cycle, and a plant blooms to complete that reproductive cycle if it needs to complete it during the season, during its life cycle, or if there are no stresses. So if it's being fed all the time, it's going to put out a lot of green growth as opposed to bloom. So that would be the second thing that I would tell people not to do, not to feed them. I never use chemical fertilizers on plants other than greenhouse crops where they're in a full environment. Nothing here ever gets fertilized, and neither should it. If you need to fertilize a plant, maybe with the exception of lawns, because we put a lot of cultural stress on them, but if you need to fertilize a plant, unless it's under stress, then you're doing something wrong. You've chosen the wrong plant, or you've got the wrong conditions. So that's the second point. The third thing that most people will likely say to you is, well, I've read about root pruning, and root pruning, if I root prune my plant, it will force it into flower. And the theory is, you go around part of the plant with a square-mouthed spade, pushing it into the ground, and it severs the roots. And the idea is that if you sever the roots, the plant is stressed, and then it will begin to flower. That is somewhat sound in theory. You know, it might seem logical, but when you actually think of it, it's a bit ludicrous. You know, it's like me saying, well, you know, everybody's going to pass their plant ID test, because if you don't, I'm going to cut off 10 of your fingers. Okay? It's kind of, it's silly. What will happen is you will put the plant under stress, and by severing half the roots, you'll affect the amount of conductivity that's going through here. Like you've taken Jack's course, so I don't know, so you know how this works. So you're cutting off the roots, so you're cutting off some of the pipeline to that. So you're putting the plant under stress. One of the best ways to encourage a plant to flower is to wait for the appropriate time, to not overfeed it, or if you're going to feed it properly at the right times. And then the other aspect of this plant is to prune it, because pruning will do what root pruning does. You're removing some of the tissue growth, but you're removing it at that end. So you can have better effect by removing tissue from the top end of a plant than from the bottom end, without detrimental effect. So wisteria needs to be pruned twice in the growing season to get it to flower. Now we do this on the one at Cuddy's. This one gets done haphazardly here. It needs to be championed a little more. But the one at Cuddy's flowers profusely because it is pruned in about July, when all of these long stems are cut back to about 12 to 14 buds of the current season's growth. And then in March, like February, March, Lucas will prune it to about 4 buds of the current season's growth. And those are tied down, and then in the spring you can see on those current 4 season stems, or 4 bud stems, you can see the buds start to swell, and that's going to be the flower buds. Right? If you don't prune, what's going to happen is you're going to have very small blooms, maybe a few more of them, but you're also going to have a lot of leaf tissue as well that's going to infuse the blooms. You're going to get lost in that sort of aspect. So those are the rules for wisteria, is to patience in growing it on a structure that will be able to support it, and prune it appropriately, and really stay away from the fertilizer. So a very, very famous vine in that regard. Any questions? Questions either, but I haven't seen a problem with it. Next one is another vine that's right here.
I got one.
Number 496. And unfortunately on 496 there are no leaves. And I can't seem to find any leaves on the ground. But this one nonetheless is easy to identify without leaves, because it's this vine right here. And if you find an old piece of it down in here, you'll see that it's got exfoliating stems. That's not
Oh, jeez. Oh no.
no, that's a
So many different vines here.
there's 3 vines. I don't think this thing works in the rain, does it?
Not very well.
No,
No,
the
not very
battery's
well.
getting flat.
Oh, back to yellow.